What is up, NFL fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Round. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach Kevin Smith. Coach, we're inching closer to the draft. What's going on?
Yeah, man, inching closer to the draft. And I saw you posting some golf videos on Twitter, inching closer to golf season, right?
Yes, I've been out a couple times now. I'm getting the itch, hitting the ball pretty well. So yeah, I'm excited for that. I just like warm weather. The cold kills me. It absolutely kills me. But yeah, no, golf is around the corner for sure. The Masters is almost upon us, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the National Football League. And as we put together our show notes, Coach and I always kind of communicate and what we want to talk about. I thought the best place to start, and we'll dive into the draft stuff as we get a little bit closer. But I think the best place to start, in my opinion, is of the new quarterbacks that found new homes. Which do you think will have the best year in 2025? It's a great place to start. So we're talking about Justin Fields going to the New York Jets. We're talking about Sam Darnold going to the Seattle Seahawks. We're talking about Geno Smith with the Las Vegas Raiders. And we're talking about Russell Wilson. Yes, we'll include Russell Wilson into the New York Giants. And no, we cannot put Aaron Rodgers to the Steelers yet because that has not been made official. Coach, out of those four players, those quarterbacks that are in new places now, which do you think will have the best year in 2025? But maybe we should step back and say, what would you define as the best year? Are we talking individual stats? Or are we talking team stats?
I don't think you can talk team stats because you've got franchises, obviously, that are on very, very different planes right now. It's hard to compare the Giants, who just won 4 games, to the Seahawks, who just won 10. But the guy I think is positioned right now for the most success, whether it be individual or team, maybe in this case both, is Geno Smith out in Las Vegas. Simply because I think structurally, it feels weird actually saying this about the Las Vegas Raiders because they've been known for their dysfunction. But structurally, I think he's in a good place. You bring Pete Carroll in, you bring Tom Brady in. Those guys obviously know a lot about winning, but they know about building culture. You now pair Geno Smith with Chip Kelly, which I think is very interesting. I think Chip Kelly is a guy that has done a great job throughout his career of finding the right fit for his scheme and his players. And you give them some weapons, that you've got some talent at the skill positions, particularly Brock Bowers, and maybe they'll add a guy like Travis Hunter. It feels as though Vegas is set up to have some success, and they're already talking about an extension with Geno Smith, which means that, in the time that they've had him in the building, they must feel pretty comfortable with him.
That's interesting that you say about the extension, because that would, if they're talking extension already, that would almost eliminate them from quarterback in the draft, would you say?
Yeah, but I don't think they're picking number 6. And honestly, I'm shocked if Shedeur Sanders makes it to number 6. So
really,
and whereas Sanders and Cam Ward are really the only 2 top 10 worthy quarterbacks in this draft, I will be shocked if Sanders makes it to 6.
I'm with you. I think that they would be fine waiting. I could see them trading maybe round 3, getting Will Howard, obviously with the connections with Chip Kelly and with Ohio State. That'd be interesting. You stole my answer. I was going to go with Geno Smith as well. I think that the situation there in Vegas is probably the best. But let's flip the script. Which quarterback will struggle the most out of these 4, in your opinion? So Geno Smith is out, so I should basically just say the 3. Which quarterback do you think will struggle the most between Sam Darnold in Seattle, Fields in New York, and Wilson with the Giants?
It just doesn't feel like it's going to get any better for Russell Wilson. You and I saw him for the last 10 or so games of the regular season and the playoff game in Pittsburgh. He started out well, but once defenses got comfortable with what Arthur Smith and that offense were doing with Russell Wilson at the quarterback position, they were able to take it away. Basically, the line out on Russell Wilson is if you immediately take away his first read and his check down, you can stifle him because he doesn't get to his second read anymore. So he's not going through a real progression. He's looking for his primary read, and then he's checking the ball down. And when you watch the Steelers film, you look at the all-22 and you're like, my gosh, they got guys running wide open in the middle of the field. Why is he not throwing them the ball? Because defenses in many instances were actually like just giving that to them and saying, like, we know once the first read's covered, he's checking the ball down. And so they adjusted accordingly. I just can't see him at 36 years old remaking his game. And now he's going to New York, where they've got some skill players that are decent, but they've got a long way to go as well. I don't see how it ends well for him there.
I Russell Wilson is a great candidate for this. I think Sam Darnold's going to struggle in Seattle. I mean, when you think about what Seattle's doing, and we've talked about this on this podcast before, it's like, I don't know what they're doing. You know, that they cut ties with Tyler Lockett. They trade DK Metcalf to the Steelers. It just seems like they're kind of starting over, and I don't necessarily feel like they needed to start over. And I think that, you know, this is going to be very telling because Russell Wilson, say what you want about him, he's gone to different avenues after his time with the Seahawks, and he's been successful. It might have been in small spurts, whether it was at Denver, even in Pittsburgh. He has had glimpses that he can still play. Sam Darnold, outside of last season, what has he done in the NFL that would make you think he is a long-term starter in this league? The answer is nothing. Not with New York, not with Carolina, and not with the 49ers for a stint. It was just that 1 year in Minnesota. I think that Sam Darnold could be, I don't know what the numbers are with his contract. That could be a huge mistake for the Seahawks. Trading Geno Smith, getting him in there. I don't know. What's your take on Darnold out there in the great Northwest?
Yeah, he's interesting because he talked a lot about how in Minnesota this past year, he was taught to play the position of quarterback in a way that he had never been taught before. He was taught to read coverage in a way that he'd never been taught before. And if that becomes like a permanent learning point, then he should be able to take that skill with him to Seattle.
Right.
If not, that just means he's a product of Minnesota's system, and he'll go to Seattle and regress. That's really the $1 million question, or the $100 million question with Sam Darnold.
That's exactly. Now let's finish this. What do you think about Justin Fields with the Jets? Justin Fields did have some success with the Steelers in the first 6 weeks that he was the starter 4-2. It was not pretty though. Anyone that watched those games knew that Justin Fields, he does have deficiency as a thrower. He is one hell of an athlete. The guy, if you build a system around him, he could probably be successful. He's also going on, I think, the 5th offensive coordinator he's been with since he entered the league coming out of Ohio State. How do you see him working with Aaron Glenn in the Jets offensive staff? Do you think it works out for them?
Well, I think Aaron Glenn is going to bring a stability and a culture to New York that they've lacked for a long time. So there's some positive there. But you mentioned offensive coordinator. That's the key to me. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the Jets offense coordinator is very young, early 30s. Never been an offense coordinator in the NFL before. He's one of these kind of rising young stars who it could go either way. I mean, he could wind up being a prodigy and a guy that really gets Justin Fields, a guy that turns out to be your next Mike McDaniels, or he could wind up being a guy who is in over his head and now causes Justin Fields to regress or can't develop his game. So I think there's a gamble there with the Jets offensive staff. They do have some weapons. They do have some decent pieces on offense to surround Justin Fields with, but I think it's all going to come down to how well can they minimize his weaknesses, maximize his strengths, and tailor their game plan to what he does best.
That is, you look at these 4 quarterbacks, and I feel like that's the most difficult one, is to try to figure out what Justin Fields is going to look like. And unfortunately for him, it does feel like this is the last shot. If he doesn't do well in New York and the Jets are looking for a new signal caller in 2026, he's probably going to be relegated to backup duties for the remainder of his career, unless he gets a Geno Smith type opportunity like he had in Seattle. So it'll be interesting. I want to switch gears and talk about a quarterback who could be in a new home in 2025. No, I'm not talking about Aaron Rodgers. I'm talking about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause in his contract, and there's already been talks that the Falcons might want to trade him. They want to dump his contract, though. If they do so, he would have to waive his no trade clause. This is a situation which it's been odd since the start. The whole contract with the Falcons didn't make sense to me when he signed there. Drafting Michael Penix Jr. when they did in 2024, it didn't make sense. What do you think is going to happen to Kirk Cousins? Because for the life of me, I cannot think that he's just going to be okay holding a clipboard in what could be the final years of his, I guess if you want to call it his prime. But still, what do you think is going to happen with Kirk Cousins?
All right, here's what's going to happen, Jeff. They're going to trade him to the Browns. The Browns are then going to draft Shedeur Sanders. And then Netflix is going to make a special where they make those two room together. It's going to be the odd couple revisited. Kirk Cousins and Shedeur Sanders would be the greatest quarterback room of all time.
Well, you had me up until the Netflix special. Do you think Cleveland would trade for him?
Why not? I mean, think about this. Here's Cleveland's quarterback situation right now. Kenny Pickett. I don't know who they have beyond Kenny Pickett. I don't know who else is on the roster right now.
Yeah.
But on their depth chart, he's QB1. So if you don't draft Shedeur Sanders, what's the plan? I don't know the answer to that question. We've talked about this before. No coach in the league has been saddled with a worse quarterback situation than Kevin Stefanski over the last couple of years. And if you're Cleveland, you need some stability. So you need to bring in somebody who can provide it. And in the short term, Kirk Cousins probably can, because you know what he is and you know what he can do. And then you need to develop a guy. And that's why I can't see them passing on Sanders in the draft. If they pass on Sanders in the draft, what's the plan at quarterback? Again, Kevin Stefanski's won 2 Coach of the Year awards, so he's got some leash, but he doesn't have a limitless amount of leash. He's going to have to improve this year on what they did last year, and you need a quarterback to do it. It just feels like Cousins gives them the best opportunity to stabilize the quarterback situation until they can figure out what's next.
All right, let's talk about Cleveland for a second. Could you see Stefanski, who there have been murmurs of him being on the hot seat? That's just fact. I don't know if that's coming. It's definitely from the fan base for sure. But I want to ask you a question. If you're Kevin Stefanski and you actually think that you could get a trade done with Atlanta, and you think Kirk Cousins would definitely be an upgrade for the now, not for the long term, could you talk yourself into saying, you know what, I don't need to take Shedeur Sanders. I can take an Abdul Carter out of Penn State, and let's have a really awesome duo of pass rushers with Myles Garrett and Carter coming out of Penn State. And if I can trade for Kirk Cousins, okay, I'll go into the season with Kirk Cousins and Kenny Pickett as my 1-2. He's trying to save his job, and he might not be there if he takes Shedeur Sanders. And even if they execute a trade for Kirk Cousins, if it goes south, I don't know. What do you think about this? He's got to try and think about the now and not so much the future.
I think you can do both. I think that there's a lot of value in trading for Cousins for the reasons you just said. And you've got Kenny Pickett as a backup who has shown he can win games in the league.
Yeah.
But I can't see them not drafting a quarterback high in this draft. I can't see them saying, oh, we're just going to go with these 2 veterans and put our stock in next year's quarterback class. All right, maybe they don't take Sanders at number 2. Maybe they take, like you said, Abdul Carter. Maybe they take Travis Hunter. They're sitting there, obviously, early in the second round, too. They might want to move up into the back end of the first round and draft Jackson Dart, or maybe they even sit there and wait for him. But you can't ignore the quarterback position with your first 2 draft picks.
Okay, there are people that think that the Steelers could potentially be interested in Kirk Cousins if Aaron Rodgers, for whatever reason, chooses to go elsewhere or retires. What are your thoughts about that as a potential?
You have to trade assets, which I think is
Cleveland would have to do the same thing. So, I mean, someone's giving up assets for Kirk Cousins. The question is do you want to do that? I personally would have no interest in the Steelers giving up the draft capital and taking on the contract that is Kirk Cousins. Are you with me?
Yeah, because they've already traded their 2nd round pick for DK Metcalf. And the Steelers have needs that they need to fill. The Steelers need to acquire draft picks more than they need to move them in order to take a 38-year-old quarterback or however old he is. Now, I will say this about Kirk Cousins. In the first 9 games of the year last year, he had 10 touchdowns and I think 2 interceptions. And then he got hurt, and he played hurt for several weeks, and his game went south. And he finished the season on a run where he had one touchdown and 9 interceptions over the last however many games it was. So if you get a healthy Kirk Cousins, he could be I'll use a term that I know people sometimes hate, game manager, but he could keep you in ball games. Right. And that's something the Steelers value. Yes. I guess the question would be, what can you get him for?
Yeah, and Atlanta supposedly it mentioned he does have a no trade clause, which he already said he's willing to waive if he has a chance to be the starting quarterback. He has no interest in being a backup. I understand that. But again, Atlanta's looking to say, okay, you want to trade for him, you're taking on his deal.
Hmm.
So that's now you're talking, like you said, assets, whether it's now or future draft capital. You're talking about being saddled with this contract now that you didn't sign him to in the first place. It just seems like a lot of moving pieces, but Cleveland might be a good spot for him. We'll have to see. All right, let's take a look at some of the news that's coming out of the NFL owners meetings down in Florida, which has happened the last 2 days. The competition committee. Yeah, we talked about this last week and the fact that the tush push, the Green Bay Packers were the one that proposed it officially for this play to be banned. Now, I've read multiple articles that are some people, like the competition committee reviews it and then they submit their review of the proposal to the owners and the owners have to vote on it. Mike Tomlin, who's on the competition committee, he was asked during his media availability what he thought. And he said, I understand both sides of it. He said, I honestly, the first time I saw it, thought that it would be made illegal because you can't do that on a special teams play. He was basically saying you can't go low on an extra point or a punt block, whatever. He thought that that would basically fall under that category. Well, it didn't. And so now the Philadelphia Eagles mastered it. And he said, I also don't like the thought that this team has gotten so good at it. Anyone can do it, and yet they're the only ones that can do it well. So there seems to be, though, some lingering talk amongst those NFL insiders that the competition committee is leaning on saying, let's just make this play illegal. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you come at it from the perspective of shoving a ball carrier from behind is not a permissible football move, then you've obviously got justification to overturn it or to ban the play. That's where you have to come at it from. If you come at it from it's not aesthetically pleasing or it poses a greater injury risk, which there's no evidence that suggests that is any more dangerous than any other football play, or we simply can't stop it and it makes the game less competitive as a result. Those are all bogus arguments. I think you have to come at it from sort of the legality of whether or not aiding a runner in that fashion is permissible.
Again, this is going to be fascinating to me as how the NFL is going to handle this and what is it going to look like? How are they going to, if they make it illegal, how do they do it? The proposal, we read this last week, is because it's not stating that you can't push a teammate. It has to be you can't push a quarterback or whoever takes the snap right behind you. I don't know. I'm shocked that it's even getting this much, I guess, credibility in terms of the proposal. I thought for sure they would just shoot it down and say, like you said, coach, last week, you said, look, stop it. And there's a part of you as a football coach that says you don't like it, then stop it. And yet there's still some talk about this. Let's talk about it. We talked about that last week and go check out our thoughts there. But I wanted to bring up another competition committee factor here. And that is that, this is more of the NFL owners, that 18 game schedule. It seems to be happening sooner rather than later. And there is actually a report out there that the NFL wants to open up the collective bargaining agreement before it expires to try and expedite this process. We knew this was an inevitability, coach. Are you surprised that this might be happening sooner rather than later?
Not really. Just the money, man. I think it just comes back to the money. When you look at what happened this past year with the streaming services all competing to air games and the amount of money that they're willing to shell out to do so, the cash cow is just producing an endless flow of revenue. And I think the league owners recognize that it's there for the taking and, strike while the iron is hot. So if you open up the CBA, then as the owners, you can negotiate and give back things that you don't want, like preseason games. The owners, I don't think, care too much about those. You could reduce it now to 2 preseason games. Heck, you could probably reduce it to 1. And teams would be okay with that, where you essentially say, we're going to take 1 preseason game. We're going to give our starters a quarter, and we're going to use the last 3 quarters to evaluate the rest of the roster. And then let's go. Let's go kick off. I wouldn't be shocked at that.
There have been some people and some players even that have said that the answer to the preseason issue of what are they going to do with the schedule is allowing more joint practices could be the answer. So as a coach, would that be significant enough for you in terms of getting your team prepared to have a joint practice where you can set up certain things, red zone offense, red zone defense, etc.? Or do you still need that game environment of a preseason to get your team ready?
You need one. You need one to work out just the operation, the communication from the headsets, from the booth to the sideline, the substitutions, in the NFL they have the radios in the helmets. Make sure that you've got all that stuff down. That stuff does require some real time experience, so you need that. But in terms of the other stuff, I don't think you need much of it. And you're right. The joint practices do take care of a lot of that. My gosh, in high school, we've gone down to one real scrimmage. When I first started coaching, we had 3 full scrimmages, and now we have one.
Wow.
And the second one that we have, or the first one, I should say, the second one is like a game scrimmage, but the first one is basically a joint practice. And we script all the scenarios and all the situations, et cetera. So that's, I think, the direction, yes, that the NFL is moving.
And football is such a different game in terms of that it's a very much a stop-start situational game. Whereas other games, whether it's basketball, the sport that I coached for 13 years, lacrosse, it is a fluid game, in which case it's a constant up and back. There's moving parts all the time. You have to have game type repetitions to really get yourself ready for that. Football, I could see how, like you talked about, building out certain scenarios, getting your team ready. It might be a little bit easier. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it might be easier than those. But it's going to be interesting. The 18 game schedule, like you said, the money's too good. The players have to be okay with the fact that they're getting more money. And I would assume that this would get done. Do you think there's a mandatory 2 bye week though, if they go 2 bye weeks, if they go to 18 games, or do you think they hold off on that?
I think that's inevitable at some point. That's going to happen. I don't know if it'll be sooner or later, but again, there's more money to be made from that as well. It's just another week of programming that you get, and another week of revenue from the advertisers, et cetera.
All right. So the NFL draft, it is only weeks away now. Well, actually, yeah, it's pretty crazy how fast it's coming up. Today is April 1st. What's left to be done, in your opinion, Coach? So here you have the final few pro days are still wrapping up. The most of them, the big ones are done. Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, they've all had their pro days. Outside of top 30 visits, if you're a coach, what's the last thing you're doing as you're checking off boxes leading up to that 3-day event?
I think there's 2 major focuses right now. One is getting your board set, so you know exactly what's your plan. What's your game day strategy? They always talk about the war room. What's it going to look like in the war room? Well, all the war room really is the execution of everything you've been planning. And I talked to a guy I went to college with who worked for the Cleveland Browns for several years, and he had an interesting experience as a part of their front office. And he said that they would plan multiple contingencies. And then they would actually walk through them almost like a scrimmage, where they were in the war room going through the draft. They would have other people within the organization drafting for other teams. And then they would throw in trades and monkey wrenches, and this guy just got taken off the board, and now we have to react to it in real time. I mean, they executed it as though it was going to be a game, a live event, which it really is. It's a live event unfolding in real time, and you have to be prepared for the contingencies. So I think that the planning right now is the key thing.
So you said you got to build your board. I feel like the board would have already been built. The question is you're fine tuning it. How much? I guess my question is, after all the stuff that you've been through this offseason and even going back to last year's games, so you've watched a full season of games, if not more than that, based on the player, where he played, et cetera, that you're looking at. You went through all-star games, whether it's the East-West Shrine Bowl, whether it's the North versus South and the Senior Bowl, it doesn't matter. You went through the NFL scouting combine. You were there firsthand. You've gone through pro days and you've talked to these. What exactly, in your opinion, would force you to change your mind or move a board? So in other words, you see a player that you've watched multiple years of film, you've seen them at the combine, you've met them at the All-Star games, you've talked to them, you maybe have them in for a visit. What would it take for you to say, we had that guy at number 10 on our big board, but now he's moving down to 20? What would happen?
Too much information. I think that's a real issue at times where you overanalyze, you overthink. You've got all this time, you've got all this information. I think I'm not saying that these guys are reading the comments on Twitter and things like that, but you have so many sources reporting on what's happening that it's almost impossible to not be influenced or impacted by that in some way. So I think you've heard many people say this about the draft process. Stick to your board. Stick to your board. The Steelers do that. They talk about that all the time. And I think part of that means just trust that you've made the right judgments on these guys and don't be reactionary. Be patient.
We'll see. We shall see. It's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. And we'll be talking more of the NFL draft as it comes closer. But we want to finish this up with a really fun player profile. We're talking about Desmond Watson. Yes, that's the 464-pound defensive tackle from Florida who rumbled his pro day down there. Man, this guy he's a wild prospect. What do you think about Mr. Watson?
Somebody posted on our Slack channel that he ran at 5.9340, and that at 464 pounds, that had the same kinetic energy, whatever that means, as a 240 linebacker running the 40 in 3.03 seconds, which is a fancy way of saying that at 464 pounds, for him to run sub 6 seconds was incredibly impressive. He also high jumped did the vertical jump of over 2 feet, which was like, whoa, like for, again, a guy that big. Listen, you want to stop the tush push? Draft Desmond Watson, man, and put him in the A gap. I don't think you're pushing him out of there. I have to believe that somebody's going to take a shot at this guy, that there has to be a situational use for a dude who's 464 pounds and not immobile. Now, he's not going to be a 3-down player by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't feel like there's got to be a use for this guy.
You would think someone would at least take a late round flyer on the guy and say, look, like maybe you are an NFC East team that's not the Philadelphia Eagles. And you say, when they go short yardage, you're on the field. Coaches would then have to figure out, is he worth a helmet on game days? If you're only using him on very specific situations, although I'm sure special teams, he would probably be on your field goal block team, your punt block team. So you might be able to use him. Would you be okay if the Steelers picked him up?
Yeah. Heck yeah. Let's go. They give him 21. He wore 21 in college. Yeah, I wonder, did Florida do that to troll Deion Sanders from Florida State? I think he was 2 at Florida State, but it's like the bizarro Deion Sanders at number 21 on.
It is crazy. It does remind me, there have been some prospects that have been big, but these guys are still athletes and they can still move. It'll be interesting to see where Watson goes, if he goes anywhere. Maybe he's an undrafted player, who knows? But I'm sure that just the fact that he's getting as much notoriety as he is now, most of the time that means that NFL teams are also picking up on that. So we'll see if he gets drafted. But all right, Coach, it's been a great show. I want to give you an opportunity to plug what you're doing for your Call Sheet Daily podcast.
Yeah, man, got some good topics this week. Yesterday's show was on what makes a player's coach. What's it mean to be a player's coach? Today's topic delves into the underworld of professional football or football specialty trainers, quarterback coaches, long snapping coaches. Unbelievable market out there right now. People making a lot of money on that stuff. Who's legit? Who are the charlatans out there stealing your money? So, got a lot of good topics on the call sheet.
The other day in Maryland, I saw a guy in this tricked out truck who is a punt kicking specialist. He had decals all over his truck. Like, this is what he does. He travels around and helps people with their kicking and punting. Man, I missed my opportunity. I did. I could have.
There's a guy here, same guy. 5-star kicking. I see the truck all over the place. 5-star kicking.
That's hysterical. All right, Coach. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk next week. Take it easy.
Yes, sir.